There's a town in New England with a pond on the north end and a dusty old dead end with my Marie lives. And at night when the stars glow, I stand by the window and wonder what more could this life ever bring.
Welcome back to Memories by Marty Civin. I'm going to bring the second segment, and I hope you watch the first. I'm going to go right on. Last time we were going up Cherry Street, and I'm going to continue to tell you what Cherry Street was like in the year 1932. Going east up Cherry Street, in the house next to Mrs. Porter lived Mr. and Mrs. Tom Greenwood. Tom Greenwood, I remember, as a chubby, bald man. He ran a dairy on the corner of Main and Spring Street in the building where Gregoire Electric is now located. In the next house on the corner of Cherry and May Street resided a very important man of that period in Spencer. Mr. Fred Trail was chairman of the Board of Selectmen and treasurer of the Allen Squire Shoe Company, Spencer's second biggest employer. Allen Squire's men's work shoes that were worn by many men during the Depression, a good and steady business to be in or employed in. Now I am going to cross Cherry Street at May on the north side of the street. On the east side of May was the home of Mr. and Mrs. Willard Johnson. Mr. Johnson worked for his wife's family, who were the Hobbs of the Hobbs Coal and Ice Company, delivering coal. The Johnsons had 5 children, 2 boys and 3 girls. Only one survives. The oldest was Frank, a very bad asthmatic, who in his adulthood worked at Norton's and lived in Holden. He died about 5 years ago in the Jewish Health Care Center in Worcester. Eleanor, the oldest girl, became a nurse. She served as an Army nurse during World War II. She died a number of years ago in Worcester. There was Grace Parrow, who many of you knew, who worked on the jewelry counter at the Fair Department Store for many years. She passed away just a few months ago. Phyllis Giwa died in Spencer quite a few years ago. She was a classmate of my brother Bob. The youngest of the Johnsons, Gordon, also known as Guy, who is retired from Norton's, lives in Holden. His son is married to Nancy Gregoire here in Spencer. Crossing May Street, still going down Cherry, was the house where Mr. and Mrs. Bill Rogan lived with their 2 identical twin sons, Jack and Bill. Mr. Rogan was a debit salesman for the Prudential Insurance Company. One Rogan twin is deceased, the other is still alive in his mid-70s. In the next house going down the street lived some people by the name of Dunn, and Rick Hobbs lived upstairs. The next home going down the street belonged to Dr. George and Tilly Garish. What wonderful people they were. Their 3 children were Anne, who lives in Denver, who I would imagine is well into her 80s. Anne, back in the late 1930s, became a Pioneer airline host. Sarah became the wife of the late Dr. Fred Mace, and of course the youngest of their son, Scott. Scott was my very best friend when we were kids. We remained very close until after we were both married. I was an usher at his wedding. He was an usher at Dorothy's and my wedding. As the years passed, we grew apart and saw very little of each other, though Scott lived about 15 miles from Spencer and Brimfield. Scott died about 7 years ago of pancreatic cancer. There is no reason we drifted apart, but it's something I deeply regret. Incidentally, at that period, there were 4 dentists in Spencer. There was Dr. Garish was a pet dentist. His office was in the Sugden block. His dental assistant for many, many years was Blanche here, who was the great aunt of Timothy Lee, who now owns the Spencer Flower Shop. And many of you older residents of Spencer remember Leo Ethier that worked for the Highway Department and was Timothy Lee's grandfather, or Teresa Lee's father. He would be a sister of Blanche here. The other dentists in town were Dr. Grenier, that was in the Marsh block. The Marsh block is the block where Bagel Inn used to be. And then there was Dr. Edward Gers and Dr. Alonzo Amasabimas, who was the oldest practicing dentist in the United States. His office was upstairs and where Mike's Pizza is today. Well, let's continue. Time has marched on a little bit. It is now 1934. My mother no longer needs babysitters. I can hang around the store all day, and if I need a little afternoon snooze, I can take it underneath the counter. Civin's specialty shop is starting to grow a little bit. On a good day, the business is taking in $11 or $12, and perhaps another $11 or $12 by my father peddling. Earlier, had said that my Uncle Nathan had gone to New York seeking employment and that he would reappear. Uncle Nathan has come back from New York with a bride, Gertrude Farrington. Gertrude is now Gertrude Israel. I would guess that the real reason Nathan went to New York was to follow Gertrude. Gertrude was a beautiful woman, considered tall for a female of that period. She was perhaps 5 feet 8 or 9, with very dark, smooth skin, black hair, I think blue eyes, very white, straight, and a great body. People that remembered her have commented to me about her beauty even within the last few years. My Uncle Nathan, on the other hand, was very short, perhaps 5 feet tall, with boundless energy. Thinking about it now, they must have been an odd-looking couple walking up Mechanic Street. How I loved that couple, and among other things, I remember Nathan's quick wit. A real bad problem had risen. Nathan Israel, the son of a devout Orthodox Jew, had married a Gentile. Gertrude Farrington Israel is half English and half Irish, and brought up in an observant Roman Catholic home, has created one hell of a furor. What is to be done? Remember that this is 1934. Interfaith marriages were pretty rare. Uncle Nathan and Aunt Gertrude, both very left-wing in their politics, and I assuming they were agnostic in their beliefs. To remedy the situation, though she'd never practiced, Gertrude converted to Judaism. Uncle Nathan and Aunt Gertrude rented an apartment on Lower May Street on the first floor of a home owned by an elderly couple by the name of Phillips. From what I can remember, the Phillips were real nice people and very kind to the Israels. Nathan enjoying the business, with Gertrude working in the store and Nathan peddling on the road. My mother and father are also starting to become part of the Spencer community. My father becomes very active in the newly organized post of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. My mother joined the VFW Auxiliary. The VFW national organization had been active in the fight to pay the World War veterans, this is World War I veterans, for their promised bonus now instead of in 1940, as originally promised. My dad was able to sell the uniforms to the post, that was also a boost to the fledgling store. My father used to wear a brown uniform with a thick sand brown belt across the middle and a shoulder belt in parades. My mother also marched, wore a white dress, blue cape, and blue beret. Was proud of my folks when I watched the Memorial Day and Armistice Day parades. My father enjoyed the VFW and had many comrades, as they were called in the days before the Cold War. Among his pals in the post was Leo LaRue, who at the age of 17 had been badly gassed in France and who was 100% disabled for the rest of his life. I remember almost every winter he would spend time in the then Rutland veterans. Leo's mother and father's Paul Ewart. Another close friend was Anton Lampron, a Greek immigrant who had been both machine gunned and gassed in battle in World War I. Mr. Lampron ran a small lunchroom called the YD Luncheonette. It was in a little store right beside the Spencer Products building on West Main Street. When my father memories I remember it was last Sunday. I can still hear Anton Lampron say, "Good morning, comrade." There seemed to be a fellowship among the veterans of World War I that you do not see among today's veterans. I do not think my mother enjoyed the auxiliary as much as my dad enjoyed the meetings, especially after a VFW ladies took her to the Victory Cafe, a dubious establishment on Chestnut Street, to toss a few beers after the meeting. My mother and Gertrude also joined the Spencer Women's Club that they both enjoyed very much. Aunt Gertrude became president of the club in 1940. To quote the historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, "These were no ordinary times. Times are hard, and the people who have elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt president. He is no ordinary man. He took office in 1933 and immediately instituted programs to fix the terrible economic conditions of the country. By 1936, Spencer is starting to be affected notably by the CCC, that's the Civilian Conservation Corps, with a camp being established in North Spencer on McCormick Road, where the 4-H camp is now. The function of the CCCs was to have unemployed young men do conservation work in the woods and forests of the country. Most of our state parks and many of our national parks were built by CCC labor. Howe Park is an example. I think I am correct when I state that the young forest workers were paid $24 a month. $19 per month had to be sent home. The CC workers were a quasi-military organization with men enlisting for a 6-month hitch. The workers could serve no more than 4 hitches or 2 years. The men came from all over New England, with some of them remaining in Spencer and marrying and finding jobs in the community. 2 of the men that come to mind would be the late Stanley Stavish and the late Pete Larson. When I was in the Army many years later, many of the old sergeants told me they started in the CCCs. Thanks to FDR, legislation was passed establishing the WPA. That stood for the Works Progress Administration. In every city and hamlet in the United States, the main function of the WPA was jobs. Get people back to work and earning money and putting food on the table. The WPA hired artists, teachers, pick and shovel workers, canal and river dredgers, dam builders, you name it. The WPA most likely had a place for you. It was the biggest make-work project in the country had ever seen. In Spencer, the men of the WPA worked on the roads and also repaired and extended the town's water system. The back part of the David Prouty Middle School was dedicated in 1939, built by WPA. In September 1935, I was 4.5 years old. Kindergarten was not compulsory. In fact, very few children went to kindergarten, but my parents thought I should start my education. Prosperous parents sent their children to Mrs. Ferguson. A year at Mrs. Ferguson's kindergarten allowed some of her brighter students to skip the first grade. My pal Scott Garish was one of these students. Her school was located on Cherry Street, 2 houses below Ash Street. Next door to the house was State Representative Ann Goby's offices and the office of Attorney Andrea Gordon. My schooling was to start at the WPA kindergarten. In the back of where Maple Street schools now stand, there were 2 red brick buildings. One occupied by the Spencer Junior High and the other, at least on the 2nd floor, was the kindergarten. All I can remember about it was that they used to serve us a glass of tomato juice and some saltines each day, and we used to pull each other around in cardboard boxes.